Drink beer, it's good for you. I'm empty-handed and I'm feeling blue, and I'm gonna drink till the day that I die.
Hello and welcome to the video. In this video we shall be looking at Norwegian farmhouse ale. Norwegian farmhouse ale, I hear you cry? I've never heard of it. Yes, and this is one of the reasons for doing this set of videos. My reasons for being interested in this style are as follows. I love Belgian farmhouse styles, and these have similarities. Unlike Belgian styles, these styles are very fast to condition. There's a new wide variety of different types of yeast to try, and also it's very nice to keep up old traditional beers. I think it's fair to say that most of us, when we hear about farmhouse ales, we immediately think of Saaz, but I can assure you that these existed in many other nations outside of the French-speaking part of Belgium. Norwegian farmhouse ales date back hundreds of years. This style is still being brewed today, and there are various different types of this yeast. There are commercial varieties of this yeast available, but most people here in Norway that are into brewing this tend to use their own versions. These versions have been handed down for generations. A popular way to reculture this yeast is to use yeast top cropping methods. This top crop yeast is then smeared onto greaseproof paper and then put in the oven at 30 degrees to dry. This can then be put into the freezer and it will keep for a very long time. A very old and traditional method is to make yeast rings. I won't go into this during this video, but it's certainly something that those that are interested should look into further. It's fascinating. Just as Saaz yeast defines that style, this type of yeast definitely defines Norwegian farmhouse ale. This type of yeast is simply known as Kveik. So what I'm putting on the screen now is some various tasting notes and characteristics of known Kveik yeast. You will no doubt note some of the similarities here between Kveik and Saaz yeast. Kveik yeast is actually fermented at temps between 30 and 40 degrees C. This obviously accentuates the fruity esters which are the characteristic of this style of yeast. For those of you that like the funk side of beer, you'll be very happy to know that a lot of these strains contain wild characteristics and also bacteria. Despite having many similarities to Belgian Saison beer, there are quite a few things about Kveik yeast and this style of beer that are actually rather different. Firstly, the fermentation temperatures that I mentioned earlier are also the pitch temperatures of this yeast. Fermentation times are also different and can vary from 2 to 7 days. This style also has no carbonation. Commonly this style is drunk just 2 days after bottling, though naturally it does improve with age as you would expect. So this style is often going from grain to glass in 9 days or less. So this style of beer is full of surprises, but I have one more left for you. The strike and Sparge water for this beer style is infused with juniper. You add juniper bushes directly into this water. This gives a very nice tea-like effect to this water. I have also added some links that I've found very useful in researching this beer style in the YouTube description. For those that can understand and read Norwegian, this is the recommended book. I will also mention that this particular Facebook group have been very useful and helpful in my pursuit of investigating this style of beer, and this is also a place where potentially you could source yourself some of this Kveik yeast. This Facebook group has members from all over the world, and automatic translations are added to the pages themselves by Facebook itself, so don't worry about any potential language barriers. I also found the people of this group to be very courteous and friendly, which is a nice added bonus. Okay, so now let's look at the traditional brewing methods for this style of beer. A copper pot with added juniper branches is heated to a boil on a wood fire. The boiled water is then transferred to a barrel. Malt is then added and stirred in. The mash is covered and left to rest. Thick juniper branches are cut and then added to hot water in a pail. They are then added to the bottom of another barrel and become part of a filter system. The mashed malt is now added on top and the wort is added also. The resulting wort is now drained into another vessel and a bag of hops is added. This is now known as raw beer. Some of this wort is now added to a bucket and given time to cool before adding the Kveik yeast in the form of a starter. The wort containing vessel, which is usually a milk jug, is added to cold water outside to chill it. The starter is now given time to ferment, which is commonly about 2 hours. The wort is added to a container that is heated to 30 to 40 degrees C depending on the type of Kveik. The starter is now pitched and the fermentation is fast, usually between 48 hours to 7 days maximum. The Kveik is usually top cropped after fermentation and then taste testing starts. The beer is then transferred to a barrel, bottles or plastic jugs. Please note that there is no boil in this traditional method. Okay, so it's now time for my modern day brew method for this very old traditional type of beer. As much as I would love to have my own cauldron style copper pot, I simply don't have one. I will, as expected, be using the Grainfather for this brew. I have sought to stay as true to the traditional methods as possible. Having said that, I will be boiling this, and this seems to be very commonplace around modern brewers of this style also, so I'm not alone in doing this. So here I am the day before the brew, just leaving the house in search for juniper. So I'm just leaving the house now, going onto the decking, and just going out into my garden. And it's actually at this point that I can actually see juniper. Yes, I've barely left my garden, and there it is. Juniper is extremely commonplace in Norway, and you don't really have to go far to actually find it. This particular juniper bush here I'm not going to take from because that will spoil the outlook for my neighbours also. But luckily there's some more here just within 5 seconds walk, just hidden behind the rocks you saw. I actually got my wife to assist with the cutting of this. My excuse was, I have to film this for my viewers. And you know what, it worked a treat. Once you've cut your juniper, it's important to give it a bit of a bash against a local rock or whatever happens to be at hand. This is just to really get rid of the bugs that may be hiding within it. You don't want any extra unnecessary protein in your brew. After that, it's important to give it a good hose down. I did this collectively at first and then did them separately, just to be sure that everything's off of this. I then preheated some water at 75 degrees C, and at that point I added the juniper branches to the Sparge water heater here. I let the juniper branches infuse in this 75 degrees water for a minimum period of an hour, and this was done for both the Sparge and also the strike water. This juniper branch infused strike water certainly changed colour, as you can see here. What it didn't do though was add a gin or that type of flavour that you would expect with juniper. This was very much like a light green tea. Rather pleasant actually. Okay, so before I go any further, I've had several requests to actually demonstrate the technique used to put the bottom plate into the grain basket. So here it is. Make sure the basket and also the silicone ring around that bottom plate are wet. Then do this. Hold the plate at an angle as shown here and just gradually slide it at an angle until you reach almost the bottom, and then you can straighten out. And now you can see it has pride of place and the silicone ring hasn't removed itself. There you go. So recently I got a new sexy mash paddle, and here it is. Yeah, I'm very happy with this. It's a very nice quality wood and it does the job just great. Okay, so it's time to mash in, and you saw my crush there. This isn't super fine, but it's definitely fine enough. So here, notice the amount of grain that I'm adding before I give it a good stir. This is very vital to make sure that we don't have dough balls. So I'm now at the stage where I'm adding the last part of the grain. At this point, of course, the mash mix is definitely at its thickest, very much like porridge. And it's at this point that it's very, very important to start from the top and gradually start breaking up the grain. By doing this, you'll make sure that you have no grain that is stuck together and all the grain is wet and ready for a very successful mash. By failing to do this, you already have lost some potential efficiency. This is a very important part of the brewing process. I often hear of people that suggest that they would like to reduce the amount of hours the brewing process takes. I personally would say start earlier or don't brew. So for the mash temperatures on this one, I stuck fairly basic in keeping with the traditional method. So I went in at 65 degrees C for mash in and 75 degrees for mash out. So with the mash all set up and going, I organised all of my boil additions and the later additions that you can see here. You can see on the right hand side of this shot the glass that has 3 vials in it. Yes, we're using 3 different types of yeast. These will be added to 3 separate fermenters to make 3 different types of this style. 2 of these 3 yeasts are actually pitched and fermented at 30 degrees C. One of them is pitched and fermented at 33. So it's now actually time to make starters for these 3 separate beers. The liquid you see here is actually wort from the mash. It has been cooled to just over 30 degrees and the yeast is pitched directly into this and held at just above 30 degrees. I used a fermenter with temperature control water to hold this temperature. This indeed is definitely a very different way to doing starters, but I tried to keep traditional. With all mashing now complete, it was time to use some more juniper infused water, this time for the sparge. I did this sparge just like I would do any other, slowly and evenly. So we're now at the boil and this has just 1 hop addition. I'm doing this at 60 minutes and I'm doing a total boil of 90 minutes because 50% of the grist is pilsner malt. Do keep in mind though, traditionally there wouldn't actually really be a boil. Bizarre but true. Because of the bizarrely high pitch temperatures of these different yeasts, it really put a challenge on me to actually work out the best way to actually handle this. What I decided was that because of the way the counterflow chiller works being so efficient, we would need to stop and start the cold water to maintain the temperatures that we wanted. It also made more sense to separate the wort 3 ways gradually, rather than filling one, then the second one and then the third one. This way we had a more of a uniform temperature in each. Luckily I had a couple of friends and fellow brewers actually come along for this brew, and to be honest it would have been rather difficult without the 2 of them to assist in this 3-way split. So thank you very much for your company and help, Shalova and Simon. During this process we used a digital thermometer in each fermenter to regularly check the temperatures of each. I was on pouring duty and I also kept an eye on the Blickman through meter to make sure that we didn't hit below 30 degrees C. After putting a reasonable amount of wort into each fermenter, we then pitched the yeast. In keeping with the Norwegian tradition in pitching Kveik yeast, we let out a little war cry as we did so, just to encourage the yeast upon its journey.
Okay, 3, 2, 1.
Yeah, they are a little bit crazy here, but hey, we had an awful lot of fun with that. Again.
Pitch.
And again. 3 times in total, of course.
Then it went silent.
Each of our fermenters was labelled according to the style of Kveik yeast that was added. Each one also had its own temperature controller and heating belt. The area that I am fermenting these in is about 14 degrees C, and I found that a brew belt would be no problem to heat each of these to the desired temperatures. Kveik yeast is actually fermented and pitched at very high temperatures, as you may have noticed. Some of them even go up as high as 40 degrees C. I have to say that I find this style of brewing very interesting, and there are quite a few different Kveik yeast to experiment with. I have 3 that I'll start off with here. I will be reculturing them, and I'll be doing some videos showing that also. Because this style is such a quick turnaround, I'm going to actually put all that to the test as well, so I will be doing some tasting 2 days after bottling this and reporting back to all of you to let you know how the beer tastes. I will then do a longer term test, probably something like 6 to 8 weeks, just to see what the difference is after a bit more conditioning time. You will find the recipe that I used for this brew within the YouTube description. Usually I would feature this, but time was short and I really wanted to pack this down into as short a watchable time as possible. There are various different people that I would like to thank for their help in making this video and in preparing for this brew. Here I present these in no particular order. I hope you all found this video very interesting and useful. For many, it not only reveals a new style of beer, but something which has a potentially fast turnaround. Look out for more related videos shortly. So if you did like this video, then please do go ahead and like it on YouTube. This really helps me out and allows the videos to be seen by a wider audience on YouTube. I've got a lot of videos in the pipeline for the future, so if you're interested in seeing what I've got coming up, then please subscribe for future content. If you have any questions on anything that I've covered in this video or in others, or anything to do with brewing in general, then please do not hesitate to get in touch. I'm more than happy to help. Until then, happy brewing!